The doors sealed behind me before I even understood what I had done. I was still holding my cargo manifest, still smelling like the recycled air of a supply shuttle, when I realized every eye in that massive hall had turned toward me. Not toward the ambassadors, not toward the generals, toward me, a logistics officer who did not belong anywhere near this room. My name is Callum Bright, and 3 minutes earlier, I had simply been looking for a place to sit down. Let me back up. The Concordant Station floats between 5 territories, built by no single species, owned by none of them, and used by all of them as neutral ground. Wars have been avoided here. Treaties have been signed here. And on that particular day, I was only supposed to drop off a supply manifest at Docking Bay 11 and leave before anyone noticed a human in a uniform 2 sizes too big for him. I got lost instead. The station corridors twist in ways that make no sense to a human brain. I took a turn that looked familiar, walked through a door that hissed open far too politely, and found myself standing in a hall filled with high-backed chairs, silver light, and silence so heavy it pressed against my ears. A summit was in session, not a small one. Representatives from 4 alien governments sat in a wide circle, their attendants standing behind them like statues. Every chair was full except one, near the center, close to a figure wrapped in layered black and violet cloth, tall, still, and radiating an authority I could feel in my chest before I understood why. I did not know who she was. I only saw an empty seat and a room where nobody was screaming at me yet, so I did what any tired, directionally confused human would do. I sat down. The moment I did, the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. The being beside me turned her head. Not fast, not sudden, just enough for me to see her eyes properly for the first time, dark as wet stone, with a faint golden ring around each pupil that seemed to catch the light and hold it. She was the queen of the Vestral hive. I did not know that yet. What I knew was that the 2 armored attendants standing behind her had gone rigid, their clawed hands twitching toward weapons they were not allowed to draw inside a peace hall. What I knew was that the ambassador from the Reptilian Coalition across the circle had stopped mid-sentence, his translator device buzzing uselessly in the silence. What I knew, most of all, was that I had made an enormous mistake. I tried to stand up quietly, the way you try to leave a meeting room you walked into by accident, hoping nobody will comment on it later. I did not even make it halfway out of the chair. One of the armored attendants stepped forward, sharp and fast, and every human instinct in my body screamed to run. But the queen raised one hand, just slightly, and the attendant froze mid-step like a puppet whose strings had gone still. I sat back down, because standing up any further felt like it might get me killed. The queen studied me, her attendants studied me, the ambassadors across the circle studied me like I was a stain that had appeared on very expensive fabric. "You are not on the registry," she said. Her voice came out low, layered, almost musical, translated a half-second late by the small device clipped to my collar. "No," I said, because lying to someone who could apparently freeze soldiers with one hand seemed like a bad plan. I got lost. I was looking for Docking Bay 11. Somewhere across the room, a human diplomat I did not recognize put his head in his hands. The queen tilted her head at me the way a bird tilts its head at something unfamiliar. Her attendants did not relax. I should have been terrified. I was terrified. But there was also something in the room that made the fear feel smaller than it should have. Something in the way she looked at me. Not with hunger, not with anger, but with a kind of surprised curiosity, like she had not expected anyone to simply sit down beside her without asking permission first. I noticed then that her ceremonial staff, a long piece of dark metal etched with symbols I did not recognize, was leaning at a strange angle against her chair, balanced badly, about to slip. I did not think. I just reached over and caught it before it hit the floor, straightened it gently, and set it back against the armrest. "Sorry," I said, mostly out of habit. It looked like it was about to fall. The entire hall went utterly silent. Not tense silent, not angry silent. Something else, something that felt like the air itself had stopped moving. The queen looked down at the staff, then back up at me, and for the first time since I had sat down, her attendants exchanged a look with each other, something close to alarm. You touched the sundrel, she said quietly. I had no idea what a sundrel was. I assumed it was the staff. I didn't mean anything by it. It just looked like it was going to fall over. One of the ambassadors from the other side of the circle stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He began speaking rapidly in his own language, his translator struggling to keep pace, words spilling out about protocol, about violation, about consequence. The Queen raised her hand again, and he stopped speaking mid-sentence, though I could tell from the way his jaw worked that he desperately wanted to keep talking. She turned back to me. "Do you know what you have done?" she asked. "Apparently something bad," I said honestly. I really was just trying to catch a stick before it fell. Something flickered across her face. I would later understand it as the closest thing to amusement her expression could hold, but in that moment, I only knew that the temperature in the room seemed to shift again, this time not colder, but warmer, like a held breath finally released. "It is not a stick," she said. "It is the sundrel. It has not been touched by another hand in 140 years. I swallowed hard. "I really am sorry. I'll be more careful. I'll just, go now, if that's all right." "No," she said. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. "No?" I repeated, because I was fairly sure I had misheard the translation. "You will not go," the Queen said, and this time her voice carried to every corner of the hall, clear and final. "You have performed the thread bond. Whether you intended it or not, it is done." I looked around at the frozen faces of the ambassadors, at the wide-eyed human diplomat still holding his head, at the attendants who seemed to be recalculating everything they thought they knew about their day. "I don't know what that means," I admitted. "I know," she said. "That is why it means something." The human diplomat finally lifted his head from his hands and crossed the room toward us, his face pale, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. His name, I would later learn, was Nolan Ashford, senior attaché to the human delegation, and he looked at me like I had just set fire to a very important building. "Officer," he said carefully, "do you have any idea what you just did?" "No," I said. "Nobody's telling me." Nolan turned to the Queen, bowing slightly, his hands clasped in the formal gesture I vaguely remembered from a briefing I had slept through months ago. "Your Eminence, I must apologize. This man is not a diplomat. He is logistics personnel. He was clearly here by accident. If there has been any offense, we will address it immediately, and I assure you, the human delegation intended no disrespect." "There is no offense," the Queen said, and something in her tone made Nolan's shoulders drop half an inch in relief. "There is an obligation." He caught the sundrel before it fell. He did not know its meaning, and yet his hand moved regardless. Among my people, that gesture, performed without calculation, without fear, without expectation of reward, can only be given by one who is threadbound. It cannot be faked. It cannot be rehearsed. It happens, or it does not. Nolan looked at me like I had somehow ruined his entire career and possibly saved it at the same time, though he could not decide which yet. "Your Eminence," he tried again. "Surely this can be undone." He did not understand the custom. Perhaps a formal apology, a gift of goodwill between our peoples, something that does not require— "It cannot be undone," she interrupted, not unkindly, but with absolute certainty. "It is not a punishment to be reversed. It is a bond that already exists." I finally found my voice again. "What exactly does this bond mean?" "Because if it means I owe you money, or I have to fight someone, I should mention I'm really not built for either of those things." For the second time, something close to amusement crossed her face. The attendants behind her exchanged another look, this one different from the first, less alarmed, more resigned. "It means," the Queen said, "that you are now considered my equal companion. Not a servant, not a subject. An equal, chosen not by rank or politics, but by instinct. It has not happened in 140 years, Callum Bright." I froze. "How do you know my name?" "I never said my name." "It was printed on your manifest," she said, nodding slightly toward the folder still clutched in my hand. "Which you have been holding this entire time as though it might protect you." I looked down at the folder. She was right. I had been gripping it like a shield. Nolan stepped closer, lowering his voice, though I doubted anything in that hall was truly private. Callum, listen to me very carefully. Whatever happens next, you need to stay calm and let me handle the diplomatic side of this. I would love for someone to handle it, I said. I just wanted to deliver a manifest. The Queen rose from her seat, and the entire hall seemed to rise with her, ambassadors standing out of reflex, attendants snapping to attention, even Nolan straightening his spine as though pulled by an invisible string. Only I remained seated for a moment too long before scrambling up awkwardly, nearly dropping my folder in the process. There will be a recess, she announced to the room, her voice carrying easily over the murmurs that had begun to spread. The summit will resume, once matters have been properly addressed. The other ambassadors began filing out, whispering to each other, throwing glances back at me that ranged from suspicious to fascinated. The reptilian ambassador who had stood up earlier lingered longest, staring at me with an expression I could not read, before finally following the others out through the tall doors. When the hall had mostly emptied, it was just Nolan, the two attendants, the Queen, and me, standing in the wide circle of chairs like the aftermath of a storm. "Your Eminence," Nolan said, his voice steadier now that fewer eyes were watching. "I need to understand the full scope of this bond, if I am to advise my government properly." The Queen studied him for a long moment before answering. "The thread bond ties one companion to the hive's ruling line. It cannot be broken by outside decree. It can only end if I choose to release him, or if he chooses to leave permanently, which would be seen among my people as a great insult to the hive, though not to me personally." "So he's not a prisoner," Nolan clarified, glancing at me. "He was never a prisoner," she said, something sharp entering her voice for the first time. "I do not take prisoners in peace halls." Nolan nodded quickly, clearly recalculating his approach. "Understood. My apologies." I finally found the nerve to ask the question that had been building since the moment I sat down. "Why does this matter so much? I mean, no offense, but I caught a stick. I didn't sign a treaty or save anyone's life. Why does one small thing turn into all of this?" The Queen turned to face me fully, and for the first time since I had walked into that hall, her posture softened just slightly, the rigid formality easing into something more tired, more honest. "Because no one touches anything of mine without calculation," she said. "Every gift I receive is measured. Every kindness shown to me is a transaction, an investment in future favor. My own hive treats me as something to be protected and obeyed, not spoken to as an equal. In 140 years, no one has reached toward me without first weighing what they might gain from it." "I wasn't thinking about gain," I said. "I was thinking your stick was about to hit the floor, and that seemed like a shame." "I know," she said. "That is precisely the point." The room fell quiet again, but this silence felt different from before, less like fear and more like something settling into place. Nolan cleared his throat carefully. "Your Eminence, if I may ask, what does this mean for the summit itself, for the treaty discussions?" The Queen turned her attention back to him, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone who had already considered every angle. "It means the Vestral hive will view your species differently than we did this morning. A thread bond cannot be manufactured through strategy. Your delegation did not orchestrate this. Your officer did not seek advantage, and yet it happened. My people will see this as proof that humans can offer honesty without agenda, something none of the other delegations have managed to demonstrate in decades of dealing with my hive." Nolan's eyes widened slightly, and I could see him doing rapid calculations behind his composed expression, understanding the shift happening in real time. "So this could help the treaty," he said carefully. "It already has," the Queen replied. I looked between them, feeling more lost than when I had first wandered into the wrong hallway. "Wait, so me sitting in the wrong chair fixed a treaty problem?" "You did not fix it," she said, turning back to me. "You revealed something true, and truth carries weight that strategy cannot buy." Nolan excused himself shortly after, muttering something about needing to draft an emergency report and looking both relieved and faintly terrified as he hurried from the hall, leaving me alone with the Queen and her silent attendants. For a while, neither of us spoke. She studied me the way someone studies an unfamiliar object they are trying to understand, not with suspicion anymore, but with genuine curiosity. "You are afraid of me," she said eventually. It was not a question. "A little," I admitted. "You did freeze a soldier with one hand a few minutes ago." "He would have hurt you," she said simply. "I could not allow that." "Why not?" "You didn't know me. I was just some human who sat in the wrong chair." She considered this for a long moment before answering. "Because the moment you reached for the sundrel, you were no longer just some human. You were something I have not had in a very long time." "And what's that?" "Someone who did not look at me and see a throne," she said quietly. "Only a person and a falling stick." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing, and for once, the silence between us did not feel dangerous. "I need you to understand something," she continued, her voice steady, but softer now. "This bond is not a cage. You are not required to remain at my side every moment, nor to abandon your duties among your own people. But you are now tied to the hive in ways that cannot be undone by treaty or apology. There will be expectations. There will be attention, some of it unwanted. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about my quiet life of cargo manifests and empty shuttle bays, about the career I had built on being unremarkable enough that nobody ever noticed me, and I almost laughed at how thoroughly that life had just ended in the span of 10 minutes. "I don't think I was prepared for any of this," I said honestly, "but I also don't think I can undo it, even if I wanted to." "You could try to leave," she said. "I would not stop you. It would cost you nothing personally. But it would cost the hive its dignity, and it would likely end whatever goodwill this moment has built between our species." That sounds like a lot of pressure for someone who just wanted a place to sit down. "It is," she agreed. "I am sorry for that. It is not fair to you." I looked at her then, really looked, past the layered cloth and the golden ringed eyes, and the weight of 140 years of isolation she had just described so plainly, and I saw something I had not expected to see in the most powerful being in that room. I saw someone tired of being alone. "I'm not going to run," I said finally, "mostly because I still don't fully understand what I agreed to, and running from something you don't understand seems like a good way to make it worse." Something shifted in her expression, small but unmistakable, the tension in her shoulders easing just slightly. "That is a very human answer," she said. "I've been told that before," I said, "usually right before something goes wrong." "Then perhaps this time, something will go right instead." The attendants behind her, who had remained silent and rigid through the entire conversation, finally relaxed their posture as well, and I realized they had been waiting, just as tense as I was, to see how this strange encounter would end. Outside the hall, I could hear the murmur of returning voices, the summit preparing to resume, delegations filing back in with a new piece of information they would all be trying to understand for the rest of the day. The Queen rose from her seat one final time, smoothing the layered cloth around her shoulders, the formal authority returning to her posture like a mask sliding back into place. But before she turned toward the doors, she looked back at me one more time. "Walk beside me, Callum Bright," she said. "Not behind, beside." I stood, still holding my ridiculous cargo manifest, still smelling faintly of shuttle recycled air, and stepped up next to her. As the doors opened and the other delegations filed back into the hall, their eyes immediately finding the two of us standing together, I understood that my quiet, unremarkable life had ended the moment I sat down in the wrong chair, and something far stranger, far bigger, had begun in its place. I had not meant to change anything. I had only meant to find a seat and avoid drawing attention to myself. Instead, I had accidentally become the first honest thing a Vestral queen had touched in over a century, and as we walked back into that hall together, side by side, I realized I no longer wanted to leave, even if I could.